Good afternoon, strategy gamers. Welcome back to episode 6 of our War in the East 2 campaign scenario of Stalingrad to Berlin. I want to begin the episode by just saying that I'm currently going through and trying to improve upon the sound quality and video quality of the episodes. So any feedback you might have on how this sounds compared to previous episodes is much appreciated. That said, let's dive right into episode 6 with where we left off. So our turn summary I've got up here for us. We already went over this at the close of last episode. To highlight, the biggest thing I'm excited about is the number of units in low supply. This is now half the number of what we had back in episodes 1 and 2. So we continue to improve our supply situation, even as we get into the winter months of the war. We're now on turn 4, December 10th of 1942, and just to recap for you from last episode, we continued repositioning our forces in this pocket down here with the 3rd Shock Army and bringing in via rail two additional armies to reinforce this line to continue our push east to west over towards Riga. What we also accomplished was encircling a total of, I think it ended up being 7 German units as we have collapsed this pocket. So even though we weren't ever able to achieve one of our strategic objectives of cutting off the supply lines, we did keep those units encircled and they were not able to break out. Moving further south and east towards Stalingrad, we see that we have really started to collapse our pocket on the German forces, and down in the South Caucasus regions here, we continue our push on Krasnodar, and we'll have this little development here where it looks like the Germans are reinforcing kind of in a straight line east of Rostov. But let's get into our actions for this turn. So if you recall from last 2 episodes, one of the reasons we didn't have any air support was most of the Eastern Front was covered with a winter blizzard, and especially in this era, planes are not very effective flying in that type of weather, and we could suffer pretty heavy operational air losses from losing airframes in that type of environment. So let's start by looking at what the weather's like in this turn, and we see that for the ground units, we're experiencing snow, and in much of the front, we are experiencing heavy snow. So our situation has not really improved here. When we look at how the weather is in the air, because the game models 2 different weather systems, we see that we still have those blizzard conditions across much of the front. However, it looks like that weather front, 2 different fronts there, is starting to move eastward, and it's starting to clear. So I'm hopeful that by the next turn, this has continued to push, and at the very least, the north of our front, these storms have passed, and we'll get this clear weather that the Scandinavian nations are currently experiencing. Just to check to our roads, not much of a change in roads from the first couple of turns here. We're still at average to poor roads in most areas. So considering that, I think what we'll do is go through much as we did last time and make sure that all of our air units are sitting here on rest, so that way they can try to recuperate, their pilots can get a bit of a break, they can not deplete supply, and this way we don't lose a number of units trying to support our ground efforts in the middle of a blizzard. Right, so we're just going through each of our air armies and adjusting these to a status of rest. Not the most exciting stuff to go through, but this is the type of administrative work that some of these games ask of you, and it's a kind of the trade-off or the price, right, of having a game with so much detail. That you have to get to this level of granularity in how you manage things for that detail to matter. It's easy to just toss in a bunch of detail to a game, but to actually have it be impactful, you usually have to tie it back to a mechanic somehow. Alright, so that's all done, and I think we'll now execute our air phase which should be pretty uneventful since we had just gone through and told all of our air armies to rest and recuperate a little during this turn. So here it's simulating that air execution. Hopefully this goes by quickly. Looks like it will. No sorties have left yet, which is good. It's stopping there just a little bit, but here we go, up to 33%. You see here where the map's currently stuck on these red hexes, or the Germans, of course. They have continued to try to push this pocket a little. So I'm curious what their end goal is with all of these units. We might need to move some of those reinforcements we'd brought in to help the 3rd Shock Army actually push north and maybe help cut some of these German units off, as we had attempted to do in our last turn here. In, I believe it was this hex. They've actually now counterattacked, and that was successful for them. Air phase just wrapping up. It's amazing how long it takes to simulate no air missions actually happening. But I do assume that in the background it's still simulating each and every day, what did that pilot do, right? If you didn't know, and I don't think we've covered this yet, the game does go down to the individual pilot that is in each of the airframes that you're managing. So while it may simulate air directives in what are called air operational groups, and effectively you can think of those as like a squadron of fighters or bombers, it does detail down to that airframe and pilot level, and has history for them as well. But now we are in the ground move phase, and right off the bat we're going to say, AI, please manage our supply depot situation. We also have our ground support air units turned to off. So I had missed this in our previous 2 episodes where I thought I had them toggled off, but really I had it turned on. But this indicator here will let you know what status it's currently at. Let's begin, as we usually do, in the north of the front up by Leningrad. And let's take a look at any battles that might have happened in the last turn. So I've highlighted air and ground battle icons to show us summaries, and nothing has happened up here in terms of battles. What we see did happen, though, is that this German line has begun to retreat. I am not sure what would motivate them to do so, but this is a wonderful opportunity for us to then bring our units in and put pressure on their assault on Leningrad. If you remember, I was a little worried in the previous 2 episodes in the fact that we actually had to pull back one of our rifle divisions here because we were in a situation where we were about to be surrounded here in this hex from 5 different hex, and we would have just been obliterated, I feel, had we stayed. So we actually retreated and pulled back here. I mean, that's hindsight's 20/20, right? Maybe we should have kept it there had we known that they were actually going to start pulling back their units, but I'm excited to see how far we can advance here. If we scroll down, let's just do a quick summary of the last turn's battles all across the front. We see that they focused a lot of their attention into this pocket, and what we managed to do in our last turn was actually this hex here. We had defeated the unit that was there. It was a rifle division, I believe, and they were forced to retreat, which then gave us zone of control of this hex, interrupting then their supplies to all of these units that you see here. And the consequence is those orange and yellow indicators then represent their current supply level. So it worked, and these units are now in a difficult supply position. The negative for us is to try to rectify the situation. They were pretty aggressive with their counterattacks. So right off the bat, you see we actually had our unit routed out of this hex, and there was quite a bit coming down on it if you look at all of these units. It was 2-to-1 in terms of just number of fighting men, and we ended up losing 46 guns. Over here, you see that we actually held against their advance, and we had a numerical superiority, which probably helped greatly. But again, it looks like they were trying to break out a little bit to relieve the pressure on these units. Down here, we also again held, and what I'm really happy about is to see that we actually knocked out 8 of their armored fighting vehicles. So we'll take a look to see what specifically those were. So it looks like Stug 3s, Marder 2s, and Panzerjäger. So again, if my history is correct, all three of those are kind of self-propelled tank destroyer type of armored fighting pieces. So they're not necessarily those fast Panzer 3s or anything like that that you think of back from their blitzkrieg operation against France, rolling across those plains at great speed. These are usually depicted in defensive or stationary positions to try to counter the enemy's armor. So they suffered some losses with those as they used them to attack here on our forces. And in the north, we also were pushed back. We had these units retreat. And while we took a number of men losses, I can't stress enough how important it is that we're inflicting these casualties on their armored fighting vehicles. There are these stories that towards the last 6 months of the war on the Eastern Front, you had entire panzer divisions with the number of tanks you can count on one hand. They had been so deteriorated just through an amount of attrition and an inability to produce to the same capacity that the Soviets were able to. So here, this is really contributing to that end, where when we start doing our full-on advance towards Berlin, we're going to be very thankful that they have 7 fewer tank destroyers available in their defensive positions from this battle. That's going to keep adding up over time. Continuing down the line, they saw more success here. It looks like they actually did manage to encircle one of our units. So if we can get them out, that will be good, but I'm not sure we'll be able to. And we actually had one of our divisions routed here, and we suffered very, very heavy losses. Over 6,000 men, and we lost all of our armored fighting vehicles. We knocked out 7 of theirs, but that's not a good situation for us, as that then takes pretty much a division of the 3rd Shock Army out of the equation for future engagements here on this front line. And they were mostly the T-60s, which are a lighter recon tank, so that's not terrible for us. And we did manage to knock out a number of Panzer IVs, which are, they'd probably be considered equivalent to the T-34s we have. They're kind of a medium tank. They're not as strong as a Tiger, obviously, so they're a little bit more mobile. Over here to the right, or excuse me, east I should say, we see that they tried desperately to break out of these pockets that we had encircled them in. So first, up here in the north, they tried to get to these units. We managed to actually hold our line here, and I can only imagine what this tank battle looked like. So the Germans assaulting with 177 armored fighting vehicles. We had 225 on the defensive, and just heavy losses for both sides in terms of fighting vehicles. And you see that these were the more mobile panzers that the Germans have available to them, less so of those anti-tank units. And we actually destroyed one of their Tigers. The unfortunate part is that they actually have a total of 20. So this unit here, we're going to want to remember the 9th Panzer Division is nothing to slouch around about. That is a significant presence of armor, and our best way to counter the 9th Panzer Division is going to be through cutting off their source of supply. The good news here, I think this is the 9th Panzer. Well, I might have to switch mode here to hover over and see. No, that's the 29th Motorized. Ah, yes. So we see that the 9th Panzer is actually completely encircled. So if we just remain patient here, they will run out of supply until the point where we can just easily shatter those units and hopefully have them completely surrender. Here we did lose this particular hex, and it looks like they're trying to make their way north and then over to get reinforcements to their pocket. And they were successful in pushing us out here, but to no great consequence because they're still encircled. Then they tried to break out to the south, and you see that their push from the south to the north was actually successful. They forced our mechanized brigade back, and we lost 29, which is the majority of our armored fighting vehicles with this particular unit. So they had great success here. And we did take out some of their panzers, though, so that's nothing to forget. But it didn't matter because ultimately we were able to hold the line here, then resulting them unable to establish a line of supply to these two units, or an escape route is likely what they would have tried in the following turn. So that worked out well for us. They actually did have some success on this side where they forced our units to retreat in these two hexes. But we did not take really any significant casualties, so I mean, I'm really kind of okay with it. And we see here that they brought in supplies through air resupply, but these units weren't able to actually escape out of that pocket, which means we're just going to plug that hole again, and this time we'll be able to do it with enough forces that they aren't able to break through. So we're still going to end up encircling this unit and being able to take it out. They also tried and advance down here, but we were successfully holding them. We had a number of tanks on our side, which probably helped, considering that the number of men was relatively equal. We knocked out 7 of their Stug 3 tank destroyers. We then have to scroll pretty much all the way down Stalingrad. And actually, we didn't have any battles. They simply did resupply. So that was all of the action the Germans had. So when we look at the map, the only area they had any counterattacks in the entire front line is north of Smolensk. So what that tells me is this is the focus for the Germans up here. And it probably makes sense if you think of their position at the fall and close of 1942, was they were trying so desperately to finally make it to Moscow. And hold Stalingrad. Don't get me wrong, Army Group South was pretty focused on that as well, but their most recent push was right here, just outside of Moscow, and since they failed, they probably have not yet reviewed their entire strategy and supplies and allocation of forces across their front line. So I think we're going to see that trend continue against the Germans here. But now that we've done a bit of a recap of the previous turn, let's look now to the Leningrad front and see exactly what we want to do to start putting pressure on the attackers here. And as I mentioned, they've pulled back their front line, which provides us just a truly wonderful opportunity to maybe even try to cut off some of these units and really put pressure on their advance. So the first thing that I want to take a look and see if we're capable of doing is if we can perhaps move up this rifle division to this hex here. Do we then have enough strength to cut out this unit, which then hopefully is going to make it easier for us to cut off these 5 divisions that are defending north here? So let's select these units, and it's a deliberate attack that's 2-to-1, and we're going to go for this here. They have retreated, so it was successful. We lost 4 fighting vehicles and pretty close on number of men lost between the two parties. Good news there. Excellent. This rifle corps, we're not going to be able to have it make that distance, which is fine. So now we're going to look on the right here to try to advance all the way east. So let's first just start by moving up this infantry unit. You see now we're almost collapsing this pocket with our zone of control. It's looking like we might not have anything with enough movement to actually make it up there. Do we have any type of mechanized or armored groups up here? It has 16 movement. Doesn't look like we do. So we may not be able to this turn cut those units off completely, but I don't believe they're going to be able to evac all of these units in the same turn. So we're in a pretty good position where we're probably just going to hold as is, and I'm going to bring these 2 units up to reinforce that line, and then we will take the 294th Rifle Division. We'll bring that up in support, and do wonder, this is part of the 8th Army, and we have the 8th Army kind of split off, it looks like, actually. So this unit down here is part of the 8th Army, but they're all the way up here. So we're going to use this to start actually advancing a little bit north. And let's see if we have enough to force back this unit. We do not. We'll leave them there. And I think we'll take the 288th. We'll also move that up, as well as the 71st Rifle Division. And here we have the 310th, which we're going to move up. And I don't know if we have enough combat preparation. We don't have enough combat preparation points to attack this pocket right here. We don't have enough movement to try to cut off this unit. That's fine. That's all in good. Still, this is a dramatic shift in the status of this front, which is really good news for us. I think what we may do is take the 265th and we're going to move it up just in preparation for knowing that we're going to need more forces south of this pocket to put pressure on them. We already have 3 units here, and we can't force any more than 3 on a hex, so we can't apply more pressure than we already have right there. And we're also going to take these 2 units that we had kind of in reserve and move them up to the same hex. Excellent news. Okay, so that's going well. Reviewing the rest of the frontier, I don't think we're going to make any other moves in terms of breaking out or counterattacking. Leningrad's front will just continue to hold. Here we have this routed unit, which is unfortunate, but we're going to continue working our way now south down this front line to see what other actions we want to take. Here, this seems like a bit of an opportunity to break through right against the Luftwaffe Field Division that's here. So let's see if we take all of these units, what our odds are. They're 2 to 1. We're going to go ahead and press that. Okay, so that was successful. And we can now move up the 382nd Rifle Division. Back here, that's an artillery brigade. Continuing to move down the line, they're pretty well defended and dug in here. This 96th Infantry Division, for example, is quite strong. Probably our only hope would be against this hex. Let's just see what the math looks like. Yeah, it's pretty much 1 to 1, so we're going to forego that opportunity. So now we get to the really interesting pocket that we saw so much action around in the last turn. Something for us to be mindful of is we actually had a lot of units that were in low or no supply in the previous turn. That has improved slightly, but we still have some supply concerns with these units. We cannot be too terribly aggressive with them. The good news is that we actually have the 31st Army starting to make its way up to the front line here. And I think we're going to try to leverage them to fill in this gap and not worry necessarily about these units being outflanked here from the west. We're also going to take our northern forces here and try to do the same thing that we did last turn. And if we can push out this unit here, which is the 329th Infantry Division, we will force the same situation as the previous turn, where these units then are going to be rather out of supply, and after 2 full weeks of a no supply situation, it should be pretty easy to kind of mop them up, if you will. So let's just see what the math looks like right now if we took these units and these. So we're actually a bit of a disadvantage. We don't have enough to push through there. And we're not going to have enough to push through there. So we may not be able to do that again, as this is a pretty strong unit. I think previously it was a Luftwaffe Field Division that we had knocked out there, which made it a little easier of a task for us. We are going to take some of these reserve units we have here and move them up closer to the front line to try to put some more pressure on the enemy. Excellent. Then move up this rifle division. So So while we cannot cut them off here, I do wonder if perhaps between these 4 hexes we have enough to force something against this unit. So let's give that a try real quick and see the math. Nope. And there again, just a little too strong. So we're probably going to find ourselves in a position where we can't cut off their source of supply another week, which is unfortunate, but there's no point throwing away units trying to attack them in a hurry. Because of these reinforcements, these 2 armies that we have redeployed to this front line, because they have now arrived, long term we will win against whichever army it is that the 329th belongs to. We simply will outnumber them and likely even have a better supply situation long term. So we're going to hold for now. What I will do actually is move the 31st Army. We're going to just take this unit here to hold that one city. I'm going to move up this HQ unit here. We're going to move up this 44th Rifle Brigade. But then otherwise we're going to now take the 31st Army and start moving them here towards the front. Okay. Take all of these units and get them up to those front lines. Excellent. Now we have another stack of 3 here to do. We should just select all of them and again, I want them to have high combat preparation points, so we're going to keep them just 1 hex away from the front with this unit here to help that refresh a little bit. And then we have the 246, which we will actually move up. What I envision is that it'll actually be next turn that we'll do a bit of a pivot where these forces will stretch themselves along this line. These 3 divisions will move north, with these 3 then filling in, creating a perimeter along the line. And these units will also then pivot up north to again try to pincer and hit this point in which they are most vulnerable. My expectation, although I've had this for 2 turns and I've been wrong each turn, is that they will pull these units out of this pocket and retreat them back to their front line now that they see the situation they're in, both in terms of supply and the forces they are finding themselves against. But maybe I will misjudge that again. So let's see. We also have the 53rd Army, which we're just going to advance along the front line to get into a position to consider some counterattacks here. I'm really curious because of the weather, we have not been able to run any type of recon, which means we don't have any idea what divisions or what units the Germans have here. So when we select all of these units and do deliberate attack, we see that it's estimated against Defender 2.5. I don't know how much Fog of War and the inability to have recon on that unit actually impacts this, but we're going to try to push that since we have such an advantage, and they were routed. So I think we made the right decision. When you look at that, we routed a unit by killing 18 of its armored fighting vehicles. That's excellent news. So this was actually some type of, yep, the Panzer Division, the 1st Panzer Division. My goodness. And they suffered some pretty heavy losses there. Well, I think that was a good move that we had then. Don't have any more movement points to move it up any further. We do have actually part of the 31st here. I missed this unit. So we're going to bring them up here to the front. And then I see that we have the 53rd Army HQ. We're going to move up to this town. All right, so that's good. So again, we've now started to establish this very strong front line that we will use to continue to push east to west. And just as a rough idea as I look at this, they have a strong concentration of forces here. If this balance of their forces hold, I think it will take time because the terrain here is swamp, which we know about. We know that's a concern. It will take us quite a bit of time to move these forces through that swamp. But if we can extend the front line... Now, you see, I'm having second thoughts about this, so let's just play this out. Let's say we continue to advance and we get to a point where we have these units drawn against here as a front line just on the edge of where the swamp ends, right? As I look at the map, what I have to ask myself is, where are their supplies going to be coming from? If you look east of this line here, there are no roads, there are no rails of any note that are going to be able to supply these units. So I think the only way that this can work effectively with an advance here in this center is if we keep a rather thin defensive line, push much of our strength to the north and the south borders of the swampland, and actually pivot in the north and south where we take these crossroads and these rail lines and we move up north from, for example, Veliki Luki, and then we move west here and south again, because if we can then control the rail line from our supplies down south, that then can reinforce and resupply these units that are going to be stuck trying to advance across these swamp areas. Now, the benefit here, the other side of the coin for us, right, is that the Germans find themselves in a similar situation. It is also going to be difficult for them to have consistent supply for their units right here, because they may have to go 3 or 4 hexes through swamp to defend this line of supply. And now that I think about it, let's actually go back here and look, right? We ended up fighting the 1st Panzer Division in light woods right next to 3 swamp terrains. That's not necessarily where you want to have your panzer divisions. In swamps and in woods is not ideal. You want them on plains whenever possible. So I think this is going to go well for us. Like I said, we'll focus on coming in here from the north and to the southwest towards Peskov. And then in the south, again, we'll try to pivot where we head west, capture these crossroads, which then will enable supply along this rail line. Okay, good. Continuing on, where else do we have opportunities to kind of probe their defense, and where do we need to move in our units, our armies, excuse me, that are resupplying the front? So right here we have this 39th Army that we brought in from the east. And I think what we will do with it is we will actually have it advance and occupy these 3 hexes here. And we're going to take these units and move them down south, and they're all part of the 3rd Shock Army. And then we're going to create a very strong pivot with these 3rd Shock Army units, to then counterattack their aggressions against our lines here. And it will... Because of supply issues, again, we just kind of have to do our best to hold the line. But the longer this continues, the more concerning it is. So that's why we need to move the 3rd Shock Army and reposition them to strongly attack in a southward motion. And the 39th Army is then just going to replace their position on the line. So let's start with that. Let's take these heroes of units. If you remember them from turn 1, we had pushed across all of this tough terrain and gotten here, and we ran into, I think at the time it was the 8th Panzer Division, and said, well, that's not good. We're going to be out of supply against a Panzer Division. And then the next turn they brought in all of these reinforcements. Let's finally try to move this mechanized corps off the front line here. And we're actually just going to take the 381st, we're just going to move them back, even though it's going to add to their fatigue considerably. They're so out of supply, that's really what's hurting the situation. But now we're going to take the 8th Rifle Corps and the 2nd Mechanized, and we're going to see if we can't cause some damage here to the Mountain and Panzer Division. Yep, they retreated. Look at those losses they suffered. That is very good news for us. Let's take a look at the details real quick. So let's actually look at the guns that were lost, because that was pretty notable for them too. A lot of anti-tank guns and mortars. For us, it was mostly mortars, it looks like. We look at armored fighting vehicles. Panzer IIIs were really the bulk of it. And, oh, I'm not a fan of seeing that. We lost 3 of our KV-1s. Other than that, it was T-70s and T-34s. Okay. Back to our movement phase here. We don't want to exhaust that unit anymore. But we are going to now move, like I said, this 3rd Shock Army down south. And they were going to have their line replaced by that 39th Army. Take the 117th Rifle down to there. The 26th Rifle Brigade is going to come down to here. I do wonder if we have another advantage to press. Yeah, let's do that. Rout at them. Excellent. So that's another division that's just off the line. We don't have enough to advance. That's fine. What I want them to worry about is I want them to worry about defending this crossroads, right, for their supply chain right here, instead of pressing an attack and enveloping these divisions we have that are out of supply in the south of our front line. So I want their focus to be over here. This 28th Rifle Division is high on fatigue and has it is in a depleted status. So we're actually going to move this back to the HQ unit to which it belongs. We're going to set it to a refit status. Okay. So what that's going to do is it's going to help it recover its operational ability and resupply as well. Over here, those are HQ units. We can't move that unit any further. These are just about spent. We might take the 8th Rifle Corps and put them on this front line. Again, disrupting that rail line. But they could be pretty easily counterattacked, and there's a Panzer Division and a motorized. And if they move down the 18th, now we're going to stay with our strength here, right? We've got numbers here that we can defend ourselves with. Here we're going to take this 39th Army. Like I said, start moving them into position to defend this line. We're going to take the mechanized group and we will move them up here. And the 178th Rifle we will also move up. Can't quite make it there. We'll take the 100th Rifle there, 186th there, move down to 117th, and then these 2 units will go right here. This is a very solid defensive line that we're going to continue expanding and stretching as this attack to the south happens with the 3rd Shock Army. And then these units actually never had a chance to disembark last turn. So we're actually going to move them right down here. Very good. Very good. Let's see now. Obviously units that don't have any supply at all we're not going to use to attack with. Do wonder if this unit is out of supply, has high fatigue. It's 25,000 men. My goodness. What can we do to try to save them? Those heroes. I think what we'll do is we'll take this guard unit, move it here, and then we're going to move up this other guard unit. So at the very least, if they want to attack there, they do have to advance. And quite possibly, we're just going to have enough men to be able to defend ourselves against this panzer unit. And if we actually move here, we cut off their line of supply to, what is this, the 19th Panzer Division. That's an interesting thought now, isn't it? If we move the 360 up, It puts this unit in jeopardy, though, because it's no longer in that defensive position that it currently occupies. But I think we're going to do it. Let's force them to try to break out this panzer unit, instead of this panzer unit being the aggressor and having the initiative. We're going to try to take that option away from this unit. And then here we see that to the south, there's just nothing we can do, as these units still don't have any supplies. Horrible situation. But now that we've completed reinforcing this front with these two separate army groups that we moved in, I am hopeful that those rail lines then will start getting more supply to these units. That's the hope at the moment. And I think we're going to close the episode out here. And then in the next episode, we will go over our plan to continue the encirclement of these units, how we're going to push north to south here on this front line, and we will also have, I think, a lot of fun looking at the Stalingrad front. So with that, we're going to call this episode to a close. Please, if you enjoyed this video, like or subscribe to the channel. If you have any thoughts or feedback for these videos or questions about the game, please add them in the comments section. But otherwise, thank you for your attention and watching today. Can't wait to see you next time, and have a great day, strategy gamers.